The first snowfall from a hospital window, a sleep story for finding peace, healing, and hope. The room was white, not the soft, welcoming white of fresh bed linens or newly fallen snow, but the clinical, fluorescent white of a place designed for healing, but not necessarily for comfort. I had been staring at that particular shade of white for 3 days now, ever since the minor procedure that had seemed so simple in the doctor's office but had somehow required an extended hospital stay. Just a precaution, they'd said. Better safe than sorry. I suppose they were right. But lying in that hospital bed as December gathered momentum outside, I felt profoundly disconnected from everything that made the season feel like the season. There were no twinkling lights strung along my window, no scent of pine or cinnamon, no carols drifting from distant rooms, just the white walls, the white sheets, and the peculiar white noise of a hospital that never quite sleeps. The disconnection was the hardest part. I had always prided myself on being present, on noticing the small beauties that populate our days. But here, in this room, with its regulation furniture, and its view of a parking lot, and a slice of gray winter sky, I felt as though I'd been separated from the world by more than just walls and a locked door that required a nurse's badge to open. I'd been separated from the rhythm of life itself. My phone sat on the rolling tray beside the bed, fully charged, but somehow offering little comfort. The messages from friends and family were kind, concerned, peppered with heart emojis and promises to visit soon. But their lives continued in full color while mine had been reduced to this monotone existence. I wasn't bitter about it. Bitterness requires more energy than I could muster. But I was lonely in a way I hadn't quite anticipated. The fourth morning began the same way the previous 3 had begun. I woke to the sound of the medication cart rolling down the hallway, its wheels slightly squeaky, announcing its approach like a herald with imperfect fanfare. Then came the ritual. Vitals checked, medications administered, the cheerful but impersonal questions about pain levels and comfort. I answered automatically, my responses falling into the comfortable rhythm of routine. "You're doing great," the morning nurse told me, and I believed her. Physically, I was healing exactly as I should. It was everything else that felt broken. After she left, I turned my attention to the window. It had become my practice, this watching. There wasn't much else to do. The television held no appeal. Too loud, too bright, too insistent. Reading required a focus I couldn't quite summon. So I watched. The parking lot. The skeletal trees beyond it. The sky that seemed to press down like a gray ceiling, low and heavy with something I couldn't quite name. That's when I noticed the change. The hospital, I had learned, has its own symphony. It's not a melody you'd choose to listen to, not something you'd download or hum while doing dishes, but it's there nonetheless, playing constantly just beneath the threshold of normal awareness. There was the hum, first of all, a baseline note that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the combined voice of all the machines keeping this place running. Ventilation systems, monitors, computers, refrigerators and medication rooms. They all contributed to this low, steady drone that became, after a while, a kind of comfort. At least it was consistent. At least it meant everything was working as it should. Then there were the punctuation marks, the distant, gentle beep of someone else's monitor, the pneumatic whoosh of automatic doors opening and closing somewhere down the corridor, the electronic ding that signaled an elevator's arrival. These sounds had become as familiar to me as my own breathing, marking time in a place where time seemed both to crawl and to disappear entirely. Footsteps were their own language. I could tell the difference now between the purposeful stride of a doctor, making rounds, the softer tread of a nurse checking on patients, and the slow, cautious shuffle of another patient taking their mandatory walk up and down the hallway. Sometimes family members passed by, their footsteps lighter, quicker, slightly uncertain, looking for a room number. At night, the symphony changed. It grew quieter but somehow more pronounced, each sound amplified by the darkness and the knowledge that the world beyond these walls was sleeping. The squeak of a nurse's shoes on the linoleum, the rustle of papers at the station, the murmur of voices consulting over a chart, and sometimes, rarely, the sound I'd learned to dread, the sudden eruption of urgent activity, wheels and footfalls and voices raised in controlled crisis. But mornings were different. Mornings brought the gradual crescendo of a place waking up. The medication cart, breakfast trays, the arrival of the day shift, phones ringing at the nurse's station, the normal, ordinary sounds of people beginning their work. It was into this morning symphony that a new sound emerged, so subtle at first that I almost missed it entirely. Silence. Not the absence of sound, that never happened here, but a change in quality, a muffling, as though someone had placed a blanket over the world outside my window, softening every edge, absorbing every sharp noise. I turned my head toward the window, suddenly more alert than I'd been in days. And that's when I saw it. The first snowflake drifting past my fourth-floor window, lazy and unhurried, catching what little light the gray morning offered. I'm not sure what I'd been expecting December to bring. Perhaps I'd assumed, in the back of my mind, that I'd be home by now, watching the season unfold from my own window, my own couch, my own life. But here I was instead, and here December was, and somehow it had decided to arrive in the form of snow. One flake became two became a dozen, and within minutes, the sky beyond my window had transformed into a living thing, full of motion and purpose. The snowflakes weren't falling so much as dancing, swirling in patterns that seemed both random and choreographed, as though the air itself had become visible, made manifest in a million tiny crystals of ice. I pushed myself higher on the pillows, ignoring the protest from my still healing incision, and stared. It had been years since I'd had the luxury of simply watching snowfall. Life and its insistence on forward motion rarely permits such indulgences. Even when it snows, we're usually doing something, driving through it, shoveling it, cursing its inconvenience or celebrating its beauty, while simultaneously checking our phones, making plans, thinking about the next thing. But here, in this room with its enforced stillness, there was nothing to do but watch. And watch I did. The flakes were small at first, barely more than frozen mist. But as the minutes passed, they grew larger, more substantial. I could track individual snowflakes now, watching them appear at the top of the window's frame and following their tumbling journey until they disappeared from view. Some fell straight, others spun. A few seemed to defy gravity entirely, hovering and dancing before finally surrendering to their inevitable descent. The light changed. That was the first transformation. The heavy gray sky that had pressed down for days seemed to lift slightly, becoming almost luminous. Snow, I remembered, reflects light in strange and beautiful ways. Even on an overcast day, the world becomes somehow brighter when snow is falling, as though each flake were a tiny mirror, redirecting whatever light it could find. And then the buildings across the parking lot began to change. The snow gathered on the brick ledges first, creating thin white lines that outlined every horizontal surface. It accumulated on the cars below, softening their hard edges, turning sedans into gentle hills and trucks into white-capped mountains. The few trees visible from my window, scraggly things that looked perpetually wind-beaten, accepted their burden of snow with what seemed like gratitude, their bare branches suddenly given purpose and beauty. I realized, watching this transformation, that I had forgotten how magical snow could be. Not the inconvenience of it, not the weather reports and the road conditions, but the thing itself. The simple, profound fact of water vapor crystallizing in the atmosphere and falling to earth in forms so intricate that no two are identical. Millions of tiny miracles drifting past my window. The view from my hospital window had been, up until this moment, profoundly uninspiring. A parking lot, some utility buildings, a strip of sky. But snow was changing all of that, proving that beauty doesn't require a perfect canvas. It only requires attention. Time did something strange while I watched the snow. It seemed to both slow down and disappear entirely. I couldn't have told you if 10 minutes had passed or an hour. The snow had created its own time, measured not in seconds and minutes, but in the accumulation of layers, the gradual transformation of the world from gray and brown to white and pristine. The parking lot below was nearly empty this early in the morning. Just a few cars belonging to the night shift, I assumed, and maybe some early visitors. The snow was gathering on their windshields and hoods, creating smooth domes that obscured any trace of the vehicles beneath. In another hour, they'd be completely covered, indistinguishable lumps in a white landscape. The brick buildings across the way had taken on an entirely different character. Every ledge, every windowsill, every architectural detail was now highlighted in white. It was as though someone had traced the building's outlines in thick paint, emphasizing lines and angles I'd never noticed before. The fire escape on the nearest building, ugly and utilitarian yesterday, had become a geometric sculpture, each step and landing bearing its burden of snow with surprising grace. But it was the trees that held my attention longest. There were only 3 of them visible from my window. Small, sad specimens that the hospital landscapers had probably planted years ago with optimistic visions of shade and beauty. In reality, they'd become stunted things, their growth apparently checked by the proximity of so much concrete and steel. I'd barely glanced at them in the days I'd been here. Now they were transformed. The snow gathered on every branch, every twig, creating intricate patterns of white against the gray sky. Where before there had been only bare branches reaching upward in what looked like desperation, there was now something that approached elegance. The smallest twigs bowed gently under their burden of snow, creating delicate arcs. The larger branches held themselves straighter, decorated now like some kind of winter bride. As I watched, a gust of wind, invisible to me in my temperature-controlled room, shook one of the trees, and a cascade of snow fell from its branches in a white shower. For a moment, the tree was half naked again, its dark bark exposed, but the falling snow immediately began the work of covering it once more. I found myself smiling at the tree's resilience, its patient acceptance of being dressed and undressed and dressed again by forces beyond its control. The snow was falling more heavily now, the individual flakes harder to track as they merged into a general whiteness, a curtain between my window and the world beyond. The parking lot lights had come on, automatic sensors responding to the dimming of an already dim day, and their glow caught the falling snow, making each flake briefly luminous before it vanished into the growing accumulation below. I had been cold before in this hospital room. The temperature was regulated, of course, kept at some optimal healing degree, but I'd still felt chilled, my feet perpetually cold despite the extra blankets the night nurses had brought me. But watching the snow, I felt something shift. It wasn't that I'd grown warmer exactly. It was more that the concept of cold had changed. That snow falling outside my window, it was cold, genuinely cold, but it was also beautiful. It made the warmth of my room feel like a gift rather than a punishment, a shelter rather than a cage. I pulled the heated blanket higher and settled back against my pillows, my eyes never leaving the window. Nature was putting on a show, and I had the best seat in the house. Movement caught my eye. Not the snow this time, but something alive, something responding to the snow in real time. A squirrel appeared on one of the tree branches, and I actually laughed out loud, the sound surprising me in the quiet of the room. The squirrel looked utterly perplexed, sitting perfectly still on a snow-covered branch as though trying to work out what had happened to its familiar world overnight. It took a cautious step forward, and its paw sank into the snow. The squirrel froze, lifted its paw, shook it vigorously as if to dislodge this offensive white substance, and then stared at it with what I could only interpret as deep suspicion. I could almost hear its thoughts. This was not here yesterday. This should not be here today. What is this nonsense? The squirrel tried again, taking another step, and this time both front paws sank into the snow. It sat back on its haunches, its tail twitching, not with its usual fluid grace, but with what looked remarkably like irritation. Then, in a movement so quick I almost missed it, the squirrel launched itself toward the trunk of the tree, apparently deciding that dealing with snow was above its pay grade. But the branch, burdened with snow and now abandoned by the squirrel's weight, bounced upward, sending a shower of white cascading down. Some of it landed on the squirrel's back. If a squirrel can look indignant, this one managed it. It scrambled up the trunk, paused to shake itself off with theatrical vigor, and disappeared into a hole near the top of the tree. I was still smiling when another character appeared in my window-bound theater, a dog. Someone was walking their dog in the parking lot despite the snow, and the dog, some kind of medium-sized mutt with floppy ears and what looked like boundless enthusiasm, had apparently never encountered snow before. Or maybe it had, and the joy was simply renewable, because this dog was beside itself with delight. It leaped and bounced, trying to catch snowflakes in its mouth, its trajectory completely erratic. Jump, twist, snap at the air, land, leap again. The dog's owner, bundled in a heavy coat, stood still and watched, the leash slack in their hand, clearly having given up on the concept of an orderly walk. The dog would catch a snowflake. I could see its jaws close on empty air, and then stop, sitting suddenly, looking confused. Where did it go? The snowflake had been right there, and now it wasn't. Magic. The dog would look up, spot another snowflake descending, and launch itself again, completely convinced that this time it would successfully capture one of these mysterious white things that appeared and disappeared so frustratingly. At one point, the dog apparently decided that catching individual snowflakes was too much work. Instead, it threw itself on its back in a patch of fresh snow and rolled, legs bicycling in the air, mouth open in what I could only imagine was complete and utter bliss. Then it flipped over and shook itself, sending up another cloud of white, and looked at its owner as if to say, "Did you see? Did you see how amazing that was?" I watched them until they walked out of my sight line, the dog still pouncing and the human still patient, and I felt something warm in my chest. Joy. That's what I was feeling. Not my joy exactly, but joy nonetheless. The squirrel's confusion and the dog's delight had somehow pierced through the walls of my hospital room and reminded me that life, messy, unpredictable, joyful life, was still happening out there. Animals don't worry about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They don't feel disconnected from their lives. They simply live them, responding to each moment as it comes. The squirrel wasn't embarrassed by its confusion, and the dog wasn't self-conscious about its joy. They just were, fully and completely present in their experience of this first snowfall. I could learn something from that, I thought. Maybe being present wasn't about being in the perfect place, living the perfect life. Maybe it was just about being awake to whatever was actually happening, right here, right now. Even if right here was a hospital room, and right now was supposed to be somewhere else. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time had become something measured by the depth of snow on the windowsill outside, by the changing light as the day struggled toward afternoon. And in that time, I became aware of something I'd never quite noticed before. How snow changes not just what you see, but what you hear. The hospital sounds were still there, the distant beep, the hum of machinery, the occasional voice in the hallway. But they seemed different now, somehow softer, as though the snow falling outside had the power to muffle even the sounds inside. Of course, that wasn't possible. Snow can't pass through walls. But the knowing didn't change the feeling. When I listened carefully, I realized what had actually changed. The outside sounds had disappeared almost entirely. The traffic noise that had been a constant backdrop, so constant I'd stopped noticing it, was gone. No cars passing, no horns, no distant sirens. The snow had quieted the city, and in doing so, had made the inside of my room seem quieter too, more peaceful, more separate from the urgent world. I closed my eyes and just listened. The hum of the room, my own breathing, slow and even. The soft rustle of the heated blanket when I shifted slightly. And beyond the window, what I imagined was silence. That particular quality of silence that snow brings, absorbing and muffling and transforming. There's a scientific explanation for it, I knew. Snow absorbs sound waves. Fresh, fluffy snow can dampen noise by up to 60%, turning even busy places into hushed sanctuaries. But knowing the science didn't diminish the magic of it. If anything, it enhanced it. The universe had conspired to create a substance that not only beautified the world, but quieted it too, offering reprieve from the endless noise of modern life. In the hospital, I'd become acutely aware of sound. When you can't do much else, your other senses sharpen. I could tell the time of day by the pattern of sounds in the hallway. I knew which nurses had the softest footsteps and which ones walked with purpose. I'd learned to distinguish between the dinner cart and the cleaning cart just by the sound of their wheels. But this silence, this snow-created silence, was something different. It wasn't an absence so much as a presence, a fullness of quiet that felt almost sacred. I opened my eyes again and looked at the window. The snow was still falling, perhaps even more heavily than before. The world beyond the glass had become almost abstract, the details blurred, everything reduced to shades of white and gray. The parked cars were now just suggestions of shapes. The buildings opposite were losing their definition, becoming ghostly outlines in the storm. If I were home, I thought, I'd probably be worried about the snow, the accumulation, the roads, whether I'd lose power. But here, in this place where I had no responsibilities and no control, I could simply appreciate it for what it was. Water transformed into art, gravity turned into a dance, the ordinary world made extraordinary. The quiet was settling into my bones now, replacing some of the restlessness that had plagued me. My body was healing. I could feel that, the steady diminishment of pain, the return of energy. But this quiet, this enforced stillness combined with this unexpected beauty was healing something else. Something I hadn't realized needed healing until this moment. I was learning, I realized, to be still. Not just physically, that had been forced upon me by circumstance, but mentally, emotionally. I was learning that it was okay to pause, to watch, to simply be without doing. The snow was teaching me this, falling and falling without agenda, without goal, simply fulfilling its nature to fall. The door opened with its characteristic whoosh, and I turned my head, slightly reluctant to break my communion with the window. But the nurse who entered, Jamie, according to her name tag, though I'd seen her before, and knew she preferred to be called by her last name, Chen, wore such a genuinely warm smile that my reluctance vanished. "Well, would you look at that?" she said, not to me but to the window, stopping in her tracks. First real snow of the season. "I've been watching it for hours," I admitted, and only then realized it was true. Hours. The morning had disappeared into snow and stillness, and I hadn't missed it. Chen walked to the window, standing beside my bed, and for a moment we both just looked. She didn't say anything, didn't feel the need to fill the silence with small talk or patient care routine. She just stood there, a busy nurse in the middle of a long shift, giving herself permission to pause for 30 seconds to watch Snowfall. "You know," she said finally, "I've worked here for 8 years, and I always forget how beautiful the view can be when it snows. The rest of the time, it's just a parking lot." She laughed, a genuine sound. "But this is worth looking at." "It's quite a show," I said, and something in my voice must have conveyed more than I intended, because she turned to look at me, her expression softening. "You doing okay? I mean, really okay? It's hard being here during the holidays, hard being separated from everything." I considered lying. "I'm fine," was such an easy default. But something about the moment, about the snow, about her genuine question, made me choose honesty instead. "I've been better," I admitted. "Physically, I'm healing fine. But I didn't expect this to be so isolating. I keep feeling like life is happening somewhere else, and I'm just stuck here watching it through a window." Chen nodded, not dismissing my feeling, not rushing to reassure me. "That's real," she said, "and it's okay to feel that way. But," she gestured at the window, "maybe life's happening right here too, just differently." Before I could respond, she smiled again. "I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere." She left the room, and I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, quick and purposeful. I turned back to the window, thinking about what she'd said. Life happening right here. Was it? Or was I just killing time, enduring a pause before I could return to my real life? But even as I formed the question, I knew the answer was changing. This morning had been real. Watching the snow had been real. The squirrel and the dog had been real. And Chen's kindness, her willingness to stop and look, that was real too. The door opened again. Chen was back, carrying 2 steaming cups, and the smile on her face was almost mischievous. "Hospital hot chocolate," she announced, handing me one of the cups and pulling the visitor's chair closer to my bed. "Now I have to tell you, this is from the machine down in the cafeteria, the one that dispenses liquids that are only theoretically related to their labels." But she sat down, her own cup cradled in both hands. "I am prepared to argue that hospital machine hot chocolate is basically a gourmet experience if you squint right and have the proper mindset." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. "That's quite a claim. I stand by it." She took a sip, made a theatrical face of consideration, then nodded. "Yeah, gourmet. Definitely. You can taste the powderiness, the hot water, the vague suggestion of chocolate that may have been in the room at some point." She grinned at me. "Come on, try it. You have to appreciate it ironically." I took a sip. It was terrible. It was the kind of hot chocolate that came from a powder designed by committee, mixed with water that was technically hot but not quite hot enough, dispensed from a machine that probably needed cleaning. It was, objectively, bad hot chocolate. It was also, somehow, perfect. "Gourmet," I agreed solemnly, and Chen raised her cup in a toast. "To snow days and parking lots and terrible hospital beverages," she said. "To finding beauty in unexpected places," I countered. We clinked our paper cups together, and then we sat in companionable silence, watching the snow fall. Chen stayed for 15 minutes, an eternity in a nurse's day, I knew. She didn't say much. Neither did I. We just sat, two people in a hospital room, drinking terrible hot chocolate and watching snow transform a parking lot into something worth looking at. At one point she pointed. "There. Did you see that?" I had. A bird, small and brown, had landed on the windowsill outside. It was snow-dusted and fluffed against the cold, and it turned its head from side to side as if considering whether this white world was the same one it had gone to sleep in. The hospital room was dim now, the overhead lights still off, the only illumination coming from the gray-white light through the window. I hadn't turned on the television. I hadn't reached for my phone. I'd simply sat for hours watching Snowfall, and it had been enough. More than enough. It had been, in its own quiet way, extraordinary. A knock on the door broke my reverie. The evening nurse, someone I didn't recognize from previous shifts, came in to check my vitals. She was efficient, kind, professional. As she worked, she glanced at the window. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "We're supposed to get another 6 inches by morning. The city's going to be a mess." "It's beautiful," I agreed, choosing not to focus on the mess, but on the beauty. That was a choice too, I realized. Where to put my attention, what to emphasize. I could think about the inconvenience of snow or its beauty. Both were true, but only one served me in this moment. After she left, I continued to watch. The snow showed no signs of stopping. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with it, dealing with slippery roads, delayed flights, all the complications that snow brings to modern life. But here, from my window, I saw only the gift of it, the transformation, the quiet, the beauty of the world being remade. As evening deepened into night, the parking lot lights became more prominent, creating glowing circles in the darkness, each one catching the falling snow and making it sparkle. It was, in its own way, as beautiful as any Christmas lights strung with intention and care. More beautiful, perhaps, because it was natural, unplanned, the simple interaction of light and snow and darkness. I thought about the holidays I was missing, the gatherings, the celebrations, the traditions. There was real loss there, real disappointment. I didn't try to pretend otherwise. But there was also this unexpected gift of stillness, this reminder that beauty exists independently of our plans and preferences. The snow didn't care that I was in a hospital. It fell anyway, offering its gift to anyone willing to watch. And I had watched. All day I had watched. And in the watching I had found something I didn't know I needed. Peace. Presence. A reminder that even when life doesn't go according to plan, even when you find yourself in places you never expected to be, the world still offers its beauty. It still invites you to notice, to wonder, to be present to what actually is rather than what you wish would be. Night had fully fallen by the time I finally turned on the small lamp beside my bed. The room transformed instantly from a viewing chamber for the snow to an ordinary hospital room again. White walls, medical equipment, the rolling tray with its scattered tissues and cup of water. But something felt different. The room felt less like a cage and more like a shelter, less like separation from life and more like a different vantage point on it. I thought about tomorrow. If the snow stopped overnight, I'd wake up to a transformed world, everything covered in white, clean and new. If it continued, I'd have another day of watching, another day of this unexpected meditation. Either way, I realized, would be fine. I'd learned to stop fighting against where I was and instead be curious about what this place, this moment, might offer. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend. "Saw on the news you're getting slammed with snow. Hope you're staying warm." I typed back, "Perfect view from my hospital window, watching the first real snowfall of the season. It's beautiful." "Glad you're finding something good in being stuck there," came the reply. Stuck. That had been exactly how I'd been thinking about it. Stuck. But maybe I hadn't been stuck. Maybe I'd been exactly where I needed to be to learn this particular lesson, to have this particular experience. Maybe stuck was just another word for still, and stillness was where transformation happened. I set the phone down and looked at the window again. The snow was a constant presence now, reliable, steady. It had been falling for hours and would continue falling through the night. Tomorrow the city crews would begin their work, plowing and salting, fighting to restore normalcy. But tonight, just for tonight, the world was allowed to be transformed, allowed to be silent and white and magical. And I was allowed to witness it, not despite being in a hospital, but because of it. This room, with its window and its enforced stillness, had become the perfect place to really see what snow could do, what beauty could do, what presence could do. I thought about Chen and her terrible hot chocolate, her willingness to stop and share a moment. That had been its own kind of snowfall. Unexpected, transformative, gone too quickly, but leaving something changed in its wake. Connection didn't require perfect circumstances or unlimited time. It required only willingness, only the choice to stop and share a moment with another human being. That was true of beauty too, and wonder, and peace. They didn't require perfect circumstances. They only required presence, attention, the willingness to see what was actually there rather than lamenting what wasn't. The snow fell. I watched, and I felt, for the first time since arriving at this hospital, genuinely grateful. Not grateful for the procedure that had brought me here, not grateful for the pain or the inconvenience or the separation from everything familiar, but grateful for this unexpected lesson in presence, this reminder that life happens in every moment, not just the moments we've planned or the circumstances we've chosen. The universe had gifted me stillness when I wouldn't have chosen it, and the snow had arrived to show me what stillness could reveal. That seemed worth being grateful for. I settled deeper into my pillows, pulling the warm blanket higher. The pain that had been my constant companion for days was barely noticeable now, reduced to a dull ache that would fade further with each passing day. My body was healing, but something else had healed too. Some restless, resistant part of me that had been fighting against this experience rather than living through it. The snow continued its gentle, persistent fall. The window framed a world transformed, and I watched, present and peaceful, until my eyelids grew heavy and sleep began to call. Tomorrow I would wake up to whatever the night had brought. More snow or clear skies, continued recovery or release from the hospital. Whatever came, I would meet it with the same presence I'd discovered today, the same willingness to find beauty in unexpected places, the same openness to connection in its many forms. The snow had taught me that transformation doesn't require perfect conditions. It happens quietly, persistently, one small moment at a time, flake by flake, breath by breath, choice by choice to be present to what is rather than yearning for what isn't. And in that transformation, I had found something unexpected. The understanding that no matter where we are, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, the world will always offer us moments of profound beauty and peace. We need only be willing to watch, to notice, to be present. The first snowfall of the season, a hospital window, a kind nurse with terrible hot chocolate, a confused squirrel and a joyful dog. These were the ingredients of my transformation, and they were enough. More than enough. They were everything. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that beauty and connection can be found even in the most unexpected places, please consider showing your support with a like and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys. May you always find moments of peace wherever you are, and may you always have the wisdom to watch when the snow begins to fall.